Alabama.
I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, the debt crisis has become a job crisis. There's no doubt in my mind that the debt that we've now incurred is already weakening our economy. The gross federal debt has increased by almost $5 trillion since President Obama took office, surging past 100% of our gross domestic product, 100% of the size of the economy. Academic research shows that this level of debt is already costing us 1 million jobs a year. Our debt is destroying growth and confidence in the economy. More borrowing will only make matters worse. But according to the Associated Press, in an article today, the President's job plan will add another $300 billion to the debt. This is the article David Espo posted. Quote, "The economy weak and the public seething, President Obama is expected to propose $300 billion in tax cuts and federal spending Thursday night to get Americans working again." I would say that he says will get American people working again. But if you've already borrowed all that you can borrow without damaging the economy, it becomes to a point you can't keep borrowing in a futile attempt to stimulate the economy when the increased debt itself is weakening the economy. According to the article goes on to say this, quote, "According to people familiar with White House deliberations, two of the biggest measures in the proposal for 2012, that begins October 1st of this year, fiscal year 2012, are expected to be a one-year extension of the payroll tax for workers and an extension of expiring jobless benefits. Together, these two would total about $170 billion. It goes on, quote, "The White House is also considering a tax credit for businesses that hire unemployed. That would cost about $30 billion. Obama has also called for public works projects such as school construction. Advocates of that plan have called for spending $50 billion on school construction." Well, I don't think school buildings is the problem with our education right now, and when you don't have any money, you've got to be careful about borrowing more to spend. And it goes on to say, quote, and this is significant, "Though Obama has said he intends to propose long-term deficit reduction measures to cover the upfront cost of his jobs plan," White House spokesman Jay Carney said Obama would not lay out a wholesale deficit reduction plan in his speech. In other words, he won't lay out a plan that would pay for it. So this is where we're heading, it seems to me. Now remember the big debate we had over the debt ceiling that ended just before our August recess at the 11th hour and the 59th minute. You remember how much spending reductions it would call for next fiscal year? $7 billion. That's how much we would actually cut spending next fiscal year, $7 billion. And this plan has called for over $300 billion in spending anew, not paid for. We're already in debt. We're already borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend, and we're going to add another $300 billion in spending, not paid for, borrowed, every penny of it. At some point, this country gets to a position where you cannot continue to borrow without damaging the economy. It's just that simple. Americans understand it. As one man told me in Evergreen, Alabama, you can't borrow your way out of debt. You cannot borrow your way out of debt. We've reached and gone past that limit, in my opinion. In order to have the kind of robust growth we desperately need, we must remove the looming threat of a Greek-like debt crisis. We must do so. This debt has a chilling effect throughout our economy. Indeed, a European banker just a few days ago said this feels like 2008. And that gained quite a bit of traction because people were feeling that, but nobody was saying it. And he was quoted all over the business channels about 2008 and the crisis that we might be facing. But the President has refused to do anything to actually reduce the surge in spending that he has engineered. Nor have our Senate Democratic colleagues here in the Senate. The House proposed a sound budget plan that would reduce spending over the next 10 years and change the debt trajectory of America. But we spent almost $8 trillion here in the Congress since the Senate Democratic majority has passed a budget, 861 days. In fact, the Lewis and Clark expedition lasted 860 days. We've passed that now without having a budget. That is a do-nothing record. It just is. At a time of national crisis, we have a failure of leadership in the Senate and in the presidency, in my opinion. President Obama has never once looked the American people in the eye and told them the bitter truth about the economic dangers we're facing and how much work must be done to get us back on a sound, secure path. It's hard to ask people to sacrifice. It's hard to ask the American Republic to make tough choices if the President, our leader, will not affirm that we need to make these choices because it's a serious threat to America. Admiral Mullen, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, has stated the greatest threat to our security is the national debt. Every expert tells us that the gravest threat to our country is the debt. In my opinion, it dwarfs any other threat that this nation faces. Yet, according to the Associated Press, the President's speech is going to talk about spending and nothing about how to deal with the debt or nothing significant about that. So the rhetoric needs to confront reality. The President has given a number of speeches about creating jobs and reducing the deficit. But a speech is no substitute for a budget or for a detailed plan. The only plan the President has ever put on paper, the only plan that can be reviewed by the press, the public, and Congress is his February budget. He reaffirmed that plan last week, sending Congress a mid-session review that made no policy changes in his budget that he submitted earlier. He has a 500-person Office of Management and Budget staff working for him. Is it too much to ask for a real plan? Whatever he may say on Thursday night, on paper, officially, he remains committed to this budget plan that grows the debt by about $12 trillion and raises taxes by about $2 trillion. What it does is it increases spending and increases taxes significantly. But the increase in spending is greater than the increase in taxes. So the net result is that the President's plan makes the budget projections we have from the Congressional Budget Office worse than they would be if we didn't have his budget plan. America needs the confidence that only a concrete plan can provide. The constant threat of more federal taxing, borrowing, and regulating undermines confidence, certainty, and predictability in our economy, that which our economy so desperately needs. So this isn't a question simply of ideology. It's really a question of leadership. We need and have to grow the economy, not the government. We need to grow the economy. America needs a budget plan that recognizes a core truth. Our nation's strength does not lie in the size of our government, but in the scope of our freedoms, the creativity of our people. We need to focus on policies that unleash the enormous productive potential of the private sector. We need to focus on policies that remove instability fostered by, really, the President's refusal to put forward a coherent economic plan that will actually reduce debt, not make it worse, and that would end the threat of high taxes and improves conditions for our job creators. Instead of the failed tax and spend approach the voters rejected in the last election, we need to focus on policies that create jobs, not more bureaucracy, helping to steady the economy in these difficult, uncertain times. Include such things as energy production. We've definitely damaged and delayed significantly the production of energy in the Gulf far beyond what was necessary. Only now is it beginning to come back. We are having incredibly increased regulations of every kind on our economy, and we failed to undertake the kind of serious tax reform that could help create growth and productivity. So these are very, very dangerous things. And I would like to just remind our colleagues that the debt problem can't all be blamed on President Bush. I was a critic of some of his spending programs. But, for example, in the last 3 years of President Bush's plans compared to the first 3 years of President Obama's, he's increased spending for education 67%. His budget for next fiscal year, beginning October 1st, was defended a few weeks ago in the Appropriations Committee, calls for a 13.5% increase in the Education Department. His budget plan calls for a 10.5% increase in the Energy Department. I affectionately call them the Department of Anti-Energy, the Anti-Energy Department. The State Department is looking at a 10.5% increase at a time when we are borrowing 40 cents of every dollar we spend. How can this be reality? And now we're talking about $300 billion will just be thrown in on top of this to stimulate the economy again. Well, I hope and trust that there's some things the government can do to improve the economy, but I'm afraid we're at a point where borrowing more money is just not one of them. Look what the Europeans have done. They're facing a similar crisis. Do they think they should borrow more and spend more? Is that what they're doing? No, they're taking their medicine. Italy is attempting to pass a $65 billion austerity plan that would balance their budget by 2013. The budget the President submitted to us does not even come close to balancing in 10 years. And in fact, the projected annual one-year deficit under the President's plan for the 10th year of his 10-year budget is $1 trillion plus. The highest budget deficit President Bush ever had was $450 billion. He will average almost $1 trillion a year, 1,000 billion, average over 10 years. Interest rate last year was $240 billion. The CBO projects in the 10th year after President Obama has doubled the deficit based on his budget, interest in 1 year will be $840 billion, crowding out things like aid to education, which is $100 billion, federal aid to highways, $40 billion. We cannot continue on this path. So Italy is making a change. What about Spain? These are three of the so-called pigs in Europe, the ones that are in financial trouble. Spain is planning a constitutional amendment and complementary law that will require close to balanced budgets at the federal and state level and to limit federal debt to 60% of their economy. Enacted austerity plan reduces salaries of public sector workers and cuts public sector spending. Portugal has a 4-year consolidation plan that will reduce federal spending by 7% of GDP and would balance the budget by 2015. We have no plan to balance the budget, nothing close to it. Indeed, the plan that the President has submitted to us, and I'm not exaggerating this is in the record books. We've got the 2-volume budget that he sent to us, and it's been analyzed by the Congressional Budget Office. We'll average $1 trillion a year in deficits, which I suppose is why, when I brought it up, the Senate voted 97-0 to reject the budget. But we don't have one. That's the only one that's pending. Our Democrat colleagues canceled the budget markup in the Budget Committee, of which I'm the ranking Republican. We never even pretended to produce a budget this year. Senator Reid, the majority leader, said it would be foolish to do so. So we're looking now at a crisis that involves millions of Americans, the jobs that they hopefully have now and hope to continue, and those who've lost their jobs. Unemployment is almost doubled. So we're facing a difficult time. And I know the pressure's on to just do something so you can politically say you did something. But that's not sufficient now. We need mature, strong, detailed leadership, a detailed plan that would put us on a path to a sound economy.
Senator, your time has expired.
I thank you. Madam President, I thank the Chair and would say we need a plan. I hope the President will do more than the article in the newspaper says, provide the kind of specific leadership that can help us move forward from the economic difficulties we face, and I yield the floor.
Morning business is closed. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to H.R. 1249, which the clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to the consideration of H.R. 1249, an act to amend Title 35 United States Code to provide for patent reform, and act to cut, cap, and balance the federal budget.
Madam President.
Senator Vermont.
Madam President, I have 5 unanimous consent requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders, and I ask unanimous consent. The request be agreed to and the request be printed in the record.
Without objection.
Madam President, every time I hear discussions about how we balance the budget, especially coming from the other side of the aisle, maybe because I've been here long enough, I remember the last time we did balance the budget during President Clinton's term. We balanced the budget. We created an amazing surplus, created millions and millions of new jobs. But you know what? Not a single Republican voted for that. It passed in the Senate only because the Vice President of the United States cast the deciding vote. No Republican voted. We actually had to do more than just have a bumper sticker, let's balance the budget. When we actually did balance the budget, which required some very tough choices, no Republican voted for that. In fact, they all condemned it, saying this would bring about rack and ruin and on and on. It didn't. It created an enormous budget surplus, created at least 12 million new jobs, was paying down the national debt, left very large surplus to President Clinton's successor, President Bush, who immediately wasted it on a needless war in Iraq and tax cuts, both of which I voted against. It's interesting also, and I find it in Congress to be lectured on the other side of the aisle about balancing the budget, when they voted to go into 2 of the longest wars in our history, and for the first time in history, voted to pay for it by borrowing the money. You want to look where trillions of dollars will have gone. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan. And now to be told that to continue to pay for unnecessary wars, we must cut out things for Americans like education, medical care, housing, scientific research into things like finding cures for cancer, Alzheimer's, repairing our aging bridges, roads, even hearing from a member of the other body saying we can't respond to the tragedies caused by Irene, the distinguished presiding officer's home state, mine and others, unless we take the money from other needs in this country, and yet that same member supported an unnecessary war in Iraq and supports paying for it on a credit card. Come on, let's be real. Let's start thinking about things in America. And speaking of which, the Senate began debate last night on the America Invents Act. We, unfortunately, so many times just to proceed to something that has support, we have to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed, and I would note that 93 senators, Republicans and Democrats alike, voted to invoke cloture on the motion to proceed. And I hope we can now move forward, pass this legislation, help spur innovation, bolster the economy, and create jobs. This is a bipartisan consensus bill. It's largely similar to the legislation the Senate passed in March. Incidentally, we passed that on a vote of 95-5. Some would say these days we can't vote on a vote like that in a resolution saying the sun rises in the east. Here, Republicans and Democrats came together, 95-5. The Senate can and should move immediately past this bill. It will create good jobs. It will encourage innovation. It will strengthen our recovering economy, and it won't cost the taxpayers anything. And I want to commend Senator Hatch, a longtime Republican lead sponsor of this measure, Senator Grassley, the ranking Republican in the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senator Kyle, the Republican whip, for their support of the bill and for their commitment to making patent reform become a reality. This is an effort that we've worked on for nearly 6 years. I sometimes shudder to think of the amount of time my staff has spent on this and I have spent on this. During those 6 years, it's become even more important to the economy. The time has come to enact this bipartisan, bicameral legislation. I ask consent to include in the record the Statement of Administration Policy on H.R. 1249 from the Obama administration.
Without objection.
The statement describes the bill as a balanced and well-crafted effort to enhance the services to patent applicants and America's innovators provided by the United States Patent Office. The Statement of Administration Policy emphasizes the bill supports the USPTO's efforts to improve patent quality and reduce the backlog of patent applications, reducing domestic and global patenting costs for U.S. companies. Now, I understand these, and I underscore these points because they're exactly the goals that Chairman Smith and the other body and I set out to achieve when we first introduced patent reform legislation 6 years ago. It's been over a half a century since our patent laws were updated. Look at the changes, Madam President, during that time. We have become even more of a global economy than ever before. We've become more of an innovative economy than ever before. And improved patent quality will benefit businesses across the economic spectrum. The America Invents Act will improve patent quality by expanding the role of third parties in the patent examination process, creating a streamlined first window post-grant review to quickly challenge and weed out patents that never should have been issued in the first place, and improving the funding mechanism for the Patent Office to confront its backlog of patent applications. That backlog, 700 100,000. Those are patents that could be creating jobs, that could be improving our economy. Let's get them done. For years, low-quality patents have been a drain on our patent system and in turn our economy by undermining the value of what it means to hold a patent. Higher quality patents will bring greater certainty in the patent system, and that's going to make it easier to get investment in American businesses and create jobs and grow our economy. This act is bipartisan legislation. It's going to lead to long-needed improvements in our patent system, our laws. I would note that no one senator, no industry, no interest group got everything it wanted in this bill. I said yesterday, Madam President, that if we were going to write this bill exactly the way we wanted it in this body, we'd have 100 separate bills. But we can only pass one. And that's the nature of compromise. And this bill represents a significant step forward in preparing the Patent Office and in turn businesses to deal with the challenges of the 21st century. And the support for the bill has grown over time. It's now endorsed by an extensive list of supporters across the political spectrum. Look at who we have here. How often do you see this kind of a breakdown? The National Association of Manufacturers, the United Steelworkers, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Association of American Universities, the American Intellectual Property Law Association, Coalition for 21st Century Patent Reform, Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the National Retail Federation, the Financial Services Roundtable, the American Bar Association, the United Inventors Association of America, the Association of Competitive Technology, the Association of University Technology Managers, Information Technology Council, the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, and so many more. I mean, this is a coalition. I cannot remember a time in my years in the Senate where you've seen such a broad coalition come together. Business, labor, high-tech come together to pass legislation. So I think we should grant this legislation final approval. The Senate and the House have now both considered it. A host of associations, interested parties from the private sector have endorsed passing the bill without further amendment. At a time when we could do something to create jobs and not cost the taxpayers, every day we wait, every day we delay is another day before those jobs are created. Every day we wait, every day we delay is another day that we hold back the innovative genius of America. Every day we wait, every day we delay is another day that we're unable to really compete with the rest of the world on a level playing field. And any amendment, including ones that I might like, would force reconsideration by the House and more unnecessary delay and longer before we can create those jobs, longer before we can innovate, longer before we can compete with the rest of the world. I can think of half a dozen amendments that I would like to have in the bill. I will vote against them because it's time to get this done. We spent 6 years. It is time to say the Senate and the House have acted. Let's do this for the country, not for any one individual's feeling that they want one more thing. I want one more thing. I want 5 more things. But I'm not going to do it because this bill has to pass. Patent reform legislation has been debated exhaustively in both the Senate and the House for the past 4 Congresses. Dozens of hearings, weeks of committee markups. We should proceed to the bill and pass it. Let's not have any one person feel that they have the magic point that everybody else has somehow overlooked. It's not the way the legislative process works. There's 100 here in the Senate, there's 435 in the House. Nobody gets every single thing they want. But here, the vast majority of Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate are getting what they feel is best for America. Isn't it time that we put America first? It's time for the Senate to do that and serve the interests of the American people by passing the important legislation before us. It's a consensus bill, facilitate invention, innovation, and job creation today. This can help everyone from startups and small businesses to our largest cutting-edge corporations. Let's put Americans back to work. Let's show the American people that the Congress of the United States actually can accomplish something and do it for America. Here is something where both Republicans and Democrats have come together. Let's not delay longer. We've taken 6 years to get here. Let's not delay longer. Just as our vote yesterday, over 90 senators voting to proceed, indicates it is time to get moving. It is time to stop debating. It is time to start acting. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
It's quiet. The President's going to give a speech. He's going to focus, we're told, on next steps in getting the economy moving, and get some people back to work, and that's something that's all of our minds. I have, as a guy who used to make his living as governor of my state, and focus a whole lot on the economy. These are issues that are of great interest to me and certainly the folks I'm privileged to represent. But the thought that occurs to me is, as we anticipate the President's speech, is I don't know if there's any one particular jobs bill that's going to do the trick. I'd like to think there was a silver bullet, but I don't know that there really is. And what I've always focused on, and what we try to focus on in our state, is how do we create a nurturing environment for job creation and job preservation. How do we do that? And among the ways that we try to do that are, one, try to make sure that we invest wisely in infrastructure, roads, highways, bridges, ports, trains, water, sewer, broadband, broadly distributed. We try to invest in the workforce to try to make sure we have people coming out of our schools, whether they're high schools or community colleges or other schools, that people can read, who can write, who can think, who can do math, and have skills that will enable them to actually fill the kind of jobs that exist in the 21st century. And the other part of what we focus on is trying to help promote research and development, not just any kind of research and development, but R&D that can actually be used to create products that can be commercialized and sold, not just in this country, but other places as well. Let me just say we've been joined here by the senator from Minnesota, and I don't know if she's on a tight timeline or not, but I don't. All right, good, all right. But anyway. Well, hopefully the President will talk about some of those things tomorrow night, and if he does, I'll look forward to whatever he talks about. I'll look forward to that. But I certainly hope that he talks about that kind of nurturing environment and what we can do to allow to plow the field so that the companies, large and small, can actually grow some jobs here. Well, part of the nurturing environment for job creation is infrastructure. We've been trying for many months since the beginning of this year to actually work on the airport infrastructure in our country, to try to bring the Federal Aviation Administration or air traffic control system into the 21st century. It's not, and needs to be. Trying to make sure that we have the resources that we need to modernize airports across the country, and that we actually pay for it. We don't actually add to the deficit. And legislation we passed here earlier this year does that. Modernizes the FAA, brings us into brings our air traffic control system into the 21st century, provides an agreement between the airlines and general aviation community, and an agreement on how to come up with the resources that are needed to modernize our airports. Good approach, and it's very encouraging to start the year that way. It's been hung up in the House for a while since then, but we need to get that done. Before us today and this week is another part of that infrastructure that we need to work on. But this is the infrastructure that allows companies that have a good idea, or inventors to have a good idea, to actually get a patent on their idea. And a patent that doesn't end up being litigated on and on and on, maybe for years, in the courts. Too often it takes years when somebody comes up with a good idea, and they submit it to the patent office. It takes a long, long time to get to the top of the list, the top of the queue, so anybody pays any attention to that application. And then there's a good chance that somebody may come in and say, you know, oh, I had the same idea before he or she did. And we end up in litigation, and we need to stop that. And we finally worked out a compromise so that whoever files first is essentially the winner. It's not whoever says they can hang up with the idea sooner. It's whoever files first. I think that's a smart approach, and we need to get this legislation done. We need to deal with one aspect of uncertainty, unpredictability that businesses face. And that would be a great thing if we could at least make progress on this front this week. Another part of the infrastructure for job creation, job preservation is the Postal Service. Not a lot of people pay much attention to the Postal Service until they get into trouble. And the Postal Service is in trouble. I describe the situation as dire. The situation is not hopeless. And the Postal Service finds himself in a situation not unlike the auto industry here in this country a couple of years ago. The auto industry losing market share. The quality of products wasn't especially good. They're losing market share. And they essentially concluded, they said, we have more people than we need for the market, the size of the market that we now sell to. And we need to be able to reduce our head count. They said we have we have to make our wage benefit structure more competitive, at least for the new people that are hired in the future, in order for us to be competitive. And the third thing that they said is we have too many plants. So they had too many people, the wage benefit structure was a little out of whack, and had too many plants. The Postal Service today, we're seeing an enormous diversion of people using traditional mail, first-class mail, enormous diversion into electronic media. As a naval flight officer in the Vietnam War, I remember how excited when we'd been joined by Senator McCain, and he went for a long time without getting much mail at all when he was a POW. But for those of us who were more fortunate and were deployed over there, but one of the happiest days of every week were the days that we got mail. postcards, letters, cards, packages, you name it. It was just great to magazines, newspapers, just some connection from home. Today, Senator Klobuchar has been over Afghanistan a number of times, Senator McCain and I. Our soldiers and sailors, airmen, Marines, they Skype. They communicate through different social media than we ever thought about, even 10 years ago. Facebook, Twitter, internet, cell phones, we never had that stuff, even 30, 35 years ago in Southeast Asia or around the world for the most part. But the world has changed, and people don't use the mail so much. They especially don't use first-class mail. And the situation the Postal Service is in today, they lost last year about, or rather they're on track this year to lose about $10 billion. They can only borrow up about $15 billion against a line of credit with the federal government, and that's it. But they're up against their line of credit. They're looking to lose more money if they do nothing. If we don't let them do something, they're going to lose a bundle of money again next year. And they could be in a position at the end of this year, in default by the end of the month, if we do nothing. And by the end of next year, maybe next September, they could be out of business. Out of business. That's not good for them, and that's not good for us or for the 7 or 8 million jobs that depend on the Postal Service to do their work. The situation with the Postal Service is similar to the auto situation of a couple of years ago, domestic auto industry, but it's different too. The U.S. auto industry was looking, not for Ford, but for Chrysler and GM, they were looking for, if you will, a taxpayer bailout. And they got that, and they repaid most of that money to the taxpayers, to the Treasury. The Postal Service is not asking for a bailout. That's not what they want. They want to be allowed to be treated like a real business, to run like a real business. They say, like the auto industry, they've got too many people, more people than they need. They need to continue to reduce that headcount through attrition, and they need to incentivize 120,000 or so people who are eligible to retire, close to retirement, incentivize them to retire by giving them early payments, $10,000, $20,000, allow them to maybe get credit for a couple of extra years, but to get the people who are right there ready to retire, they need to be encouraged and incentivized to retire. Not fired, not laid off, incentivized to retire. So one, people, too many people. Two, they've got too many post offices. They have 33,000 post offices around the country. The Postal Service doesn't want to close them all, but they're saying let's take a look at 3,000 of them. Less than a tenth. Look at 3,000 of them and have a conversation with the communities there. Do all those 3,000 post offices in those communities need to stay open? Are there some that can actually co-locate their services? So you go into a convenience store there that's open 24/7, or you go into a pharmacy that's open maybe 7 days a week, or you go into a supermarket that's open 7 days a week, and you can actually get your Postal Service, a lot of your postal work done. Co-locate those post offices and the post office, that service in one place. And that's more convenient to consumers. And that's what the Postal Service wants to do. The last thing that the Postal Service has too much of is mail processing centers. They have over 500 of them around the country. They argue that it's probably twice the number that they need, and they need to be able to reduce those. The Postal Service also needs to be treated fairly. And they have been paying into the Civil Service Retirement System for many years for some of their older employees, and more recently into another more recent Federal Employee Retirement System for the newer employees. Two separate audits done by Siegel & Company and by a consulting company called Hay Group have concluded that the Postal Service has overpaid its obligation in the Civil Service Retirement System by $50 billion or more. They've estimated they've overpaid their obligation to the Federal Employee Retirement System by about $7 billion or more. The Postal Service has asked to be reimbursed for those overpayments. And they would like to use those overpayments, on one hand, to help meet their obligation to pay the heavy health care costs for folks that are retired for the Postal Service or about to retire. They want to pre-fund that. It's an obligation under the 2006 law. And they'd like to use some of that $7 billion overpayment into the Federal Employee Retirement System to actually incent folks that are eligible to retire from the Postal Service to go ahead and retire. 80% of the costs of the Postal Service are people, 80%. The Postal Service has reduced its headcount from about 800,000 people to, say, 600,000 people over the last 7 or 8 years. They need to be able to continue to reduce that in the years to come. and roughly 100,000 over the next 2 or 3 years through attrition, and maybe another 120,000 by incentivizing people to retire. Now, the senator from Minnesota is still standing here waiting for me to stop, and I've got a lot more that I want to say, but I'm going to stop. And I'll come back maybe later today and finish my comments. But let me just conclude with this. We need to act so that the Postal Service can save itself. We don't need to bail them out. We need to let them act like a real company. The situation is dire, but it is not hopeless. And they need to be able to address, as the auto industry did, too many people. They need to be able to close and consolidate some post offices and co-locate those services in places that make more sense or more convenient to consumers. And they need to be able to close some of their mail processing centers. And they need to be treated fairly with respect to their overpayments into both the civil service retirement system and the federal employee retirement system. We can do those things. We need to do those things. We don't need to do it next year. We need to do it this year. Madam Chair, I yield the floor to our friend from Minnesota. Thank you for your patience.
Madam President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Well, thank you very much to the senator from Delaware, and I appreciate the ability to go ahead. I know the senator from Arizona is waiting as well. I rise today to speak in support of the America Invents Act, a bill to revamp our patent system. As a member of the Judiciary Committee, Madam President, I worked on this bill. I was one of the co-sponsors, and I also helped manage the bill the last time when it was on the floor. I'm here today to make sure that we get it over the finish line. It is without dispute that intellectual property is one of our nation's most valuable assets, and our patent system plays a vital role in maintaining the value of our intellectual property. In fact, the Commerce Department estimates that up to 75% of economic growth in our nation since World War II is due to technological innovation, innovation that was made possible in part by our patent system. I see firsthand the importance and success of a robust patent system whenever I am visiting Minnesota companies and talking with business leaders in our states, as I did many times over the past month. Minnesotans have brought the world everything from the pacemaker to the Post-it note. These innovations would not have been possible without the protection of the patent system. This strong commitment to innovation and development is why our state ranks 6th in the nation in patents per capita, and we are #1 per capita for Fortune 500 companies. Companies like 3M, Ecolab, Medtronic need an efficient patent system. But it's also medium-sized companies like Imation in Oakdale and Polaris in Medina that rely on patents to grow their companies and create jobs here in America. In fact, from 1980 to 2001, all of the net job growth in our country came from companies that were less than 5 years old. It's the person in the garage building a mousetrap, or in the case of Medtronic, the first battery-powered pacemaker that drives our economy forward and creates the products that Americans can make and sell to the world. I truly believe that to get out of this economic rut, we need to be a country that makes stuff again, that invents things, that exports to the world. And that is why it is so critical that we pass the America Invents Act. Unfortunately, our patent laws haven't had a major update since 1952. The system is outdated and is quickly becoming a burden on our innovators and our entrepreneurs. Because of these outdated laws, the Patent and Trademark Office faces a backlog of over 700,000 patent applications. And many would argue that all too often, the office issues low-quality patents. One of these 700,000 patents may be the next implantable pacemaker or a new and improved hearing aid. Our current patent system also seems stacked against small entrepreneurs. I've spoken to small business owners and entrepreneurs across Minnesota who are concerned with the high cost and uncertainty of protecting their inventions. For example, under the current system, when 2 patents are filed around the same time for the same invention, the applicants must go through an arduous and expensive process called an interference to determine which applicant will be awarded the patent. Small inventors rarely, if ever, win interference proceedings because the rules for interferences are often stacked in favor of companies with deep pockets. This needs to change. Our current patent system also ignores the realities of the information age that we live in. In 1952, the world wasn't as interconnected as it is today. There was no internet. People didn't share information like they do in this modern age. In 1952, most publicly available information about technology could be found either in patents or scientific publications. So patent examiners only had to look to a few sources to determine if the technology described in the patent application was both novel and, the word, non-obvious. Today, there is a vast amount of information readily available everywhere you look. It is unrealistic to believe that a patent examiner would know all of the places to look for this information. And even if the examiner knew where to look, it is unlikely he or she would have the time to search in all these nooks and crannies. The people that know where to look are the other scientists and innovators that also work in the field. But current law does not allow participation by third parties in the patent application process, despite the fact that third parties are often in the best position to challenge a patent application. Without the benefit of this outside expertise, an examiner might grant a patent for technology that simply isn't a true invention. And those low-quality patents clog up the system and hinder true innovation. Our nation can't afford to slow innovation anymore. While China is investing billions of dollars in its medical technology sector, we're still bickering about the regulations. While India encourages invention and entrepreneurship, we're still giving our innovators the runaround playing red light, green light with stop-and-go tax incentives. The truth is that America can no longer afford to be a country that simply exists on churning money and shuffling paper, a country that consumes, imports, and spends its way to huge trade deficits. What we need to be is that nation that invents again, that thinks again, that exports to the world. A country where you can walk into any store and pick up a product and turn it over and it says, made in the USA. That's what our country needs to be. It's what Tom Friedman, who writes for the New York Times and is a Minnesota native, calls nation building in our own nation. As innovators and entrepreneurs across Minnesota have told me, we need to rejuvenate our laws to ensure that our patent system supports the needs of a 21st century economy. The America Invents Act does just that. First, the America Invents Act increases the speed and certainty of the patent application process by transitioning our patent system from a first-to-invent system to a first-inventor-to-file system. This change to a first-inventor-to-file system will increase predictability by creating brighter lines to guide patent applicants and patent office examiners. By simply using the filing date of an application to determine the true inventor, the bill increases the speed of the patent application process while also rewarding novel, cutting-edge inventions. To help guide investors and inventors, this bill allows them to search the public record to discover with more certainty whether their idea is patentable, helping eliminate duplication and streamlining the system. At the same time, the bill still provides a safe harbor of a year for inventors to go out and market their inventions before having to file for their patent. This grace period is one of the reasons our nation's top research universities, like the University of Minnesota, support the bill. The grace period protects professors who discuss their inventions with colleagues or publish them in journals before filing their patent application. The grace period, along with prior user rights, will encourage cross-pollination of ideas and eliminate concerns about discussing inventions with others before a patent application is filed. This legislation also helps to ensure that only true inventions receive protections under our laws. By allowing third parties to provide information to the patent examiner, the America Invents Act helps bridge the information gap between the patent application and existing knowledge. The legislation also provides a modernized, streamlined mechanism for third parties that want to challenge recently issued low-quality patents that should never have been issued in the first place. Eliminating these potential trivial patents will help the entire patent system by improving certainty. The legislation will also improve the patent system by granting the U.S. Patent and Trade Office the authority to set and adjust its own fees. Allowing the office to set their own fees will give them the resources to reduce the current backlog and devote greater resources to each patent that is reviewed to ensure higher quality. The fee-setting authority is why IBM, one of the most innovative companies around that has facilities in Rochester, Minnesota, and in the Twin Cities, that was granted a record 5,896 patents in 2010. That is why IBM supports this bill. They want to even bring more inventions and more jobs to America. Mr. President, as chair of the subcommittee, Madam President, as chair of the Subcommittee on Competitiveness, Innovation, and Export Promotion, I've been focused on ways to promote innovation and growth in the 21st century. Stakeholders from across the spectrum agree this bill is a necessary step to ensure that the United States remains a world leader in developing innovative products that bring prosperity and happiness to our citizens. Globalization and technology have changed our economy. This legislation will ensure that our patent system rewards the innovation of the 21st century. I know that this is not the exact bill that we passed in the Senate earlier this year, but the major components of that earlier bill are in the one on the floor today. Those components are vital to bringing our patent system into the 21st century and unleashing American ingenuity like never before. Sometimes it's obvious how you can get a job. Sometimes it's harder to see when you have to get an invention invented, when you have to get it approved, when you have to get that patent, when you have to market it. That's the hard work that goes on in this bill. Thank you, Madam President. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield the floor to my colleague and friend from Arizona, Senator McCain.
Madam President,
Senator from Arizona.
I ask unanimous consent to address the Senate as if in morning business, and I additionally ask unanimous consent that I be joined in a colloquy with Senator Graham from South Carolina and Senator Lieberman from Connecticut.
Without objection.
Yesterday, we learned from media reports that the Obama administration has made a decision to sharply reduce the number of U.S. forces that it's proposing for a post-2011 security agreement with Iraq to roughly 3,000 troops. That media report has not been contradicted yet by anyone in the administration, so one has to assume that that is the direction which the administration is headed. As is well known, 3,000 troops is dramatically lower than what our military commanders have repeatedly told us on multiple trips to Iraq that would be needed to support Iraq's stability and to secure our mutual interests that our two nations have sacrificed so much to achieve. Our military leaders on the ground in Iraq have told us that in order to achieve our goal, which is a stable, self-governing Iraq that's a partner in fighting terrorism and extremism, they need a post-2011 force presence that is significantly higher than 3,000 troops. We continue to hear that the Iraqis are to blame because they haven't asked for a new agreement. Well, the fact is, in early August, Iraq's major political blocs reached agreement to begin negotiations with the U.S. on a new security agreement. This week, Masoud Barzani, the president of the Kurdistan Regional Government and one of the most respected men in Iraq and, in my view, one of the finest, called for a continued presence of U.S. troops, saying Iraqi security forces are still not prepared to secure protection for Iraq. Perhaps significantly, the Inspector General for Iraq Reconstruction, Mr. Stuart Bowen, just recently reported, and I quote, "Iraq remains an extraordinarily dangerous place to work. It is less safe, in my judgment, than 12 months ago." Buttressing this conclusion is the fact that June was the deadliest month for U.S. troops in 2 years. And by the way, we continue to hear these quotes from various administration officials about absence a request from the Iraqis, it's difficult to settle on any one thing. Victoria Nuland stated that the Iraqi have to come if they come forward with a request, we would consider it. That's assuming that it's only in Iraq's national interest to have additional troops here. It's in America's national security interest not to lose Iraq after the sacrifice of some 4,500 brave young Americans. And the consequences of failure are obvious. And who is it that opposes the continued presence of the U.S. troops most vociferously, strenuously, and sometimes in a very subversive way? Iran and the Saudarists. Iran and the Saudarists want the United States out. It's not a matter of Iraqi national security interest. It's a matter of American national security interest. What does 3,000 troops do? I don't know what 3,000 troops do, but I know that they are required to have certain force protection numbers, which would be significant, and then how many troops would be left to carry out the mission of protecting United States civilians, contractors, and personnel who remain there. I guess you can sum this up, this decision-making process, best, and I quote from a New York Times article, quote, plan would keep small force in Iraq past deadline. Quote, a senior American military officer said the planning at this point seemed to be driven more by the troop numbers than the missions they could accomplish, exactly the opposite of how military planners ideally like to operate. Quote, I think we're doing this thing backwards, the officer said. Quote, we should be talking about what missions we want to do and then decide how many troops we'll need. I can assure my colleagues that is the view of the majority of members of the military, many of whom who have multiple tours in Iraq, that is their view of this process that we are going through. I would point out that my friend Senator Graham and Senator Lieberman, who are coming, and I have been to Iraq on many, many occasions since the initial invasion. We have had the opportunity to watch the brave young Americans serve and sacrifice. We have had the ability to see as the initial military success deteriorated into a situation of chaos, beginning with the looting and unrest in Baghdad to the very unfortunate decisions that were made in the early period after the victory in Iraq. And we watched a situation where many of our military leaders, but also those who are now in the administration, say that if we employed a surge, it would fail. The President of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the Secretary of State, the President's National Security Advisor, all of them said the surge would fail, was doomed to failure. And the fact is, the surge succeeded. And the fact is that we now have an Iraq that has an opportunity to be a free and independent country, but maybe more importantly, one that would never pose a threat to the United States of America. And most importantly, a chance for the Iraqi people to enjoy the fruits of the sacrifice that thousands and thousands and thousands of Iraqis have made on their behalf, and approximately 4,500 brave young Americans have. The Senator from South Carolina and the Senator from Connecticut and I recall meeting with military leaders in 2006, where we were told that everything was going fine. The senator from Connecticut, the senator from South Carolina, and I recall meeting with a colonel, a British colonel in Basra, who told us that unless we turned things around, that we were doomed to failure. And we remember the summer of 2007, when we were lonely voices, along with that of General Petraeus, General Odierno, and other great leaders in saying the surge could and must succeed. And I'll leave it up to historians to decide whether our venture into Iraq was a good one or a bad one, whether the sacrifice of young Americans' lives was worth it, whether a stable and democratic Iraq, which can be the result of our involvement there, was the right or wrong thing to do. But what we should not do, and in deference to those who have served and sacrificed, we must not do, is make a decision which would put all of that sacrifice and all that was gained by it in jeopardy because of our failure to carry out the fundamental requirement of contributing to Iraqi security in this very difficult transition time. So I would ask my friend from South Carolina to start with, perhaps he remembers when we went to Baghdad, I believe it was 2007, and went downtown with General Petraeus and were mocked and made fun of in the media as I came back and said that things had improved in Iraq. Perhaps the senator from South Carolina recalls when we had that almost triumphant visit in downtown Fallujah, a conflict that was won with great cost in American blood and treasure. Perhaps the senator from South Carolina recalls going into downtown Baghdad and going to a bakery in an environment not of complete security, but dramatically improved. All of it was purchased. All of it was purchased by the expenditure of America's most precious asset, young Americans' blood. And now we place all of that at great risk. And the decisions, I say with respect, made by the same people who said that the surge couldn't succeed. So I urge the administration and the President to reconsider what apparently is a decision and listen to our military leaders once and employ sufficient number of troops to provide the Iraqis with, as Barzani said, sufficient number of troops to secure. As Barzani said, Iraq's security forces are still not prepared to secure protections for Iraq. And I would ask my colleague from South Carolina and Connecticut, aren't there plans for us to have large amount of American civilians there, contractors to protect them, probably the most expensive form that we could do rather than American troops? Is it not a flawed strategy to not have enough American troops there to ensure that the lives of Americans who are serving there in various capacities are protected?